Attack on Titan's manga ended with chapter 139 in April of 2021, which, if I'm mathing correctly, means that at the time of recording this video it has been nearly 5 years since Isayama formally put his pen down. It's scary that it's been that long to me, and yet it feels strangely right considering the sheer amount of things that have happened in that time span as well as the amount of time I've needed to sort through my multitude of feelings for such a divisive, multifaceted ending. When the final chapter released, it seemed like the world was falling apart from within the confines of my little sphere of the internet. People who had long since turned on the story laughed and taunted that the series had undeniably fumbled the ending, even longtime fans felt confused and conflicted, and there were very few who had fully settled feelings on it in the immediate aftermath. I myself felt mixed about the ending. I really loved chapters 137 and 138 and felt a little baffled by elements of 139, and so despite loving other aspects of it, I couldn't say that I finished the chapter saying, man, Isayama nailed it. However, despite being mixed on it, I decidedly stood on the positive side of the fence and ultimately concluded after collecting my thoughts that it was a good, albeit flawed, ending. Now in the present day, years later and with the ending of the anime to chew on, I've sorted out my feelings definitively and feel somewhat different than I did back then, and I kinda want to talk about the series as a whole, reflecting briefly on all of the arcs, making notes of the characters, some differences between the adaptation and the source, my feelings on all of it, and so on. Attack on Titan is an iconic, pivotal pop culture giant celebrated worldwide that will always have resonance. To this day, you will have the loudest of insecure people calling you a coper for enjoying the ending and thinking that it's a wonderful story, spewing all manner of bizarrely cruel insults at Mikasa and Isayama and Eren and Armin, maybe in this very comment section, and I think that's a statement of how enduring the work is. And of course, there is the same sort of energy in the opposite direction from those who love the ending directed to those who don't. People who feel strongly about this series will likely never experience those feelings fading, whether that be positive or negative. And I kinda love what that says about the story. It is evergreen, and it was clear from the start that it was never going to please everyone anyway. Season 1 encapsulates 4 arcs: the Fall of Shiganshina Introductory Arc, the Struggle for Trost Arc, the 104th Training Corps Arc, and the Female Titan Arc, but I find this section lends itself so beautifully to all of this material working cohesively within 25 episodes for almost a comprehensive story in itself. When I think of these arcs, I actually primarily think of my experience with the anime rather than the manga. Even aside from this being my first anime and the season that got me into the medium, this is one of the most iconic and legendary seasons of anime ever, and I think that a notable amount of the series' success can be attributed to Tetsudo Araki's incredible direction here. With the voice direction, sense of tension, occasion, heightened emotion, and general feel for the subject matter not just translating it well for mainstream audiences, but more importantly, elevating the material through presentation from the word go. From the big Armin speech to the simple ominous crack of someone cutting up a fish in the market as a prelude to brutal catastrophe. This adaptation is Attack on Titan at its most dynamic, which is great for a section of the story where Isayama's art is naturally at its roughest. It isn't perfect by any means, with some bad cuts to Mikasa's character that would become a theme later on, some occasionally over-the-top jarring moments, and a tendency to often quickly swing from hope to despair in a way that exaggerates the tone such that it can feel overwhelming and exhausting at times. But this material gets across Eren's character better than ever in a way that Isayama has stated actually offered clarity for the character's direction for the rest of the manga at the time of Season 1's release. It really sells his sheer monstrosity from the very beginning, his burning fervor for freedom, and how that contrasts his sentiment and connections. There are several moments that are chilling for the implications of later stuff, and I don't necessarily mean the allusions to his manipulation of Grisha in episode 1, but more so the scenes like him waking up to help plug the wall involving burning his family around him, showing the complete dichotomy between his two innermost desires and how they conflict with one another, or him completely losing himself in both ecstasy and bewilderment from within the Titan. The action sequences and music placement are out of this world. All of the characters are established beautifully and viscerally, and generally this is a fantastic debut season that completely understands and wrings everything it possibly can out of every sequence. That Levi Squad decimation still haunts me to this day, for instance. Speaking purely of the source material, it's a great set of introductory arcs with several moments that have embedded themselves in my mind as iconic, with awesome foreshadowing all over the place and a great establishment of several of the story's key themes. So while these arcs don't quite touch greatness, they're still really good and they lay the foundation for the series to be able to hit those heights later.
俺にはわかる。こいつは本物の化け物だ。巨人の力とは無関係にな。どんなに力で抑えようとも、どんな檻に閉じ込めようとも、こいつの意識を服従させることは誰にもできない。
The Clash of the Titans arc is one that I have an extreme soft spot for. I think it's genuinely incredible. It fleshes out characters from the protagonistic cast that needed it. It boldly shifts the focus and broadens the scope as every arc needs to as it builds towards the story's apexes, and generally it's just a complete thriller, full of emotions, drama, tragedy, twists, and all that you can ask for. From the quiet, painful reflection of Armin and Mikasa realizing that Eren always goes forward without them, a line that would ring agonizingly true for the rest of the series, to the pulse-pounding moment of Erwin losing his arm and screaming for his soldiers to move forward regardless. Ymir becomes one of the best characters in the story here, with an exquisite backstory and character culmination that would echo forward. And Bertolt steps into the role of one of the most tragic in the cast, with his tear-stricken, horrified face a second prior to transforming after the reveal embedding itself in my nightmares, and his lonely, agonized scream for someone to come find them piercing in its sadness.
僕らに謝る資格なんてあるわけない。けど誰かお願いだ。誰か僕らを見つけてくれ。
And of course, this is where Reiner comes into his own as well, with his fractured, traumatized psychology taking the forefront, although his defining arc will be discussed later. And Clash of the Titans does some incredible stuff with Erwin as well, illustrating the purity and double-edged nature of his dream and search for truth. I really think this arc is underrated. It's got tear-jerking moments all over the place, cataclysmic stakes, a broadening and deepening of the world and fundamental questions of the story, several of the series' best moments, and an adaptation that to me is one of the best, in the conversation for the best despite some rearranging. And well, it has Scream. Clash of the Titans is a pivot point for me in the series. It's the season that turned my investment into genuine love, where Isayama properly came into his own narratively and artistically, and it laid the groundwork while also being an incredibly pulsating, devastatingly emotional package in and of itself. It's incredible, and yet somehow, it's still only scratching the surface of what this story was capable of. Uprising is a really peculiar arc in some ways when it comes to reception, partly due to the complete shift in focus and style in some ways, and partly due to the lackluster anime adaptation for it. I think it's become slept on. And I understand why, but likewise I also think it's incredibly underrated. This is a brilliant arc for what it does in broadening and transitioning the scope of the series, laying foundations for story-defining material, and all around telling an eternally relevant story that is capped off with some of the most brilliant stuff in the series. As I said, the adaptation for this arc is very flawed, comfortably the worst in the story to me. It unnecessarily simplifies and rearranges things in a way that leads to less impact and more turbulent flow. It cuts out a criminal amount of dialogue and moments and dilutes elements of the character writing for Armin, Mikasa, Historia, and especially Levi. And while the character art and models are good and there are moments of brilliant quality, all around the adaptation is notably stiffer and less dynamic than the previous 2 seasons here. And all of this is why whenever I re-experience this arc, outside of individual moments and episodes, I do so through the manga. It's simply the only way that Uprising should be experienced holistically to me. And it should be viewed in its best version, because as I said, this arc is great and has some of the most important and best stuff in the series. As our protagonists become outlaws, we explore deeply rooted corruption and a reshaping of political, religious, and historical landscapes to mislead the populace. But in order for truth to prevail and corruption to be overthrown, connections are made to empower us. Uprising is, in miniature, an example of how it's possible to enact change on the world and rebel, but also a demonstrator of how we can reach mutual understanding with one another despite boundaries. It's a broadening of scope, a ground-level encapsulation of the core political ethos of the creation of the Alliance during the Rumbling, and it introduces and encapsulates that philosophy, integrating it with the Survey Corps ideals while also finally properly fleshing out Erwin's character and why he is the man that he is. But even aside from all this, Uprising also has pure greatness in the more micro-sequences, containing some series-defining chapters, Bystander and Friend. Now, Bystander and Night of the Battle to Retake the Wall are stated by the wiki to actually be a part of the Return to Shiganshina arc, but I also see why they tagged it on to part 1 of season 3, and to me it likewise fits as a prelude to it and part of the previous material. Either way, it's magnificent stuff. Bystander is the backstory for Grisha that we've been searching for all this time, to an extent at least, told through the lens and perspective of the flawed, desperately human and sad everyman of Keith Shadis, which culminates in one of my favorite moments of the series.
だからこの子はもう偉いんです。この世界に生まれてきてくれたんだから。
The music, the sentiment, the way it echoes forward to late-game Eren. Everyone has a right to exist, and everyone is special through existing. It's one of my favorite scenes in the story. But right up there with Bystander, and maybe slightly above it, is Friend. The culmination of Kenny's character and a thematic encapsulation of the entire series through Kenny and Uri's story. A gap was bridged between the two, what would seem like an impossible solution given their respective positions, and it was done not through violence but through communication, understanding, and connection. The fact that these two found each other in this way is viewed as a miracle itself, and the presence of this miracle is enough for Uri to find encouragement to search for a paradise in this world amongst the doom. This introduced the idea that as long as a paradise, a utopia, an improbable miracle is possible, however faint that possibility, it is worth going for, which ends up being the primary ethos of the Alliance later on. And Uri's insistence on reaching this place, his hope, contrasting Kenny's inability to see what his friend could, so exquisitely parallels Eren and Armin's dynamic. Both yearning for the beyond, but one seeing genuine hope for a utopia that seems beyond reach, and the other wishing that he could see that. It's a masterpiece, and it's Isayama's and Attack on Titan's message encapsulated.
ああ、避けがたい真実だ。それでも私はあの時の奇跡を信じている。
And while this isn't as masterful as those two chapters and episodes, the end of the Night of the Battle to Retake the Wall contains one of the most special moments in Attack on Titan to me. As the scouts start to head out to Shiganshina in this mission that will undoubtedly result in mass death, they are for the first time ever celebrated and encouraged and cheered on by the people they fight for in a manner unlike any of them have ever seen. The Survey Corps have been mocked and derided for most of their existence as a constant target for frustration for the public because of what seems like the futility of their existence. And Erwin knew that would happen from the start and resigned himself to becoming a devil to achieve his dream. Constantly losing, constantly sacrificing. He never intended to become a hero and knew that wasn't a possibility. But in this moment, he is one. He's loved by the people who support them all wholeheartedly. He's never experienced a moment like this before, and he never will again. So he takes full advantage. It's an emotional swell of a moment that always makes me tear up. And while it is a prelude to tragedy, in a way it's also an apex and a payoff of Erwin's life. He never did it for recognition and cast off that possibility early, but hell if it doesn't feel good to be loved for once. And it empowers him and the rest to charge forward into a journey that would change their lives and the story at a fundamental level. Return to Shiganshina is quite simply one of the greatest arcs I've ever seen. Although funnily enough, perhaps due to this and the fact that I've already talked about it in multiple videos before, I don't have a ton to say about it here. It is all at once a capstone and conclusion and payoff to so much of what Attack on Titan has been so far, while also being a platform for beginning a new saga of the story. It has some of the biggest and most emotional moments and sequences throughout, while also recontextualizing everything we know about this world so far. It is lofty and full of dreams and ideals, but also grounds itself in brutal reality and crushing sacrifice. The adaptation for this is once again somewhat stiff in places, and the color direction prior to Armin's sacrifice is somewhat lacking. Yet overall, I find that it transmits the emotions incredibly effectively, and I really do love it. But as for the narrative itself, like I said, I don't really have much to say that I haven't stated a million times over in past videos. This is peak fiction. Erwin's charge, Armin's sacrifice, the origin of Flock, who is a devilishly fantastic character, Midnight Sun, Levi's decision, Bertold's horrific fate, the basement reveal, the tragedy of the cyclical war between Eldia and Mahle, the scene at the deceptively vast expanse of the ocean that Eren and Armin both seemingly yearned for. This is where Isayama solidified Attack on Titan's rise into genuine greatness, and also became a truly great artist, I think. A stunning mix of cruelty and beauty, this is the most iconic and widely celebrated Attack on Titan arc for good reason, and it's pretty much perfect by my estimation and one of my favorite arcs ever. It solidified Attack on Titan as a masterful narrative while simultaneously broadening the scope of it to allow for it to become more somehow. It cemented Erwin Smith as one of the most legendary characters of all time through his fitting and desperately sad end, and all in all, it's the most important arc in the story to me. However, while it is this magnificent culmination of Attack on Titan up till this point, it also kickstarted a new story within it, one that would offer a whole new feel and perspective, and carry forward the altered fates of all involved. Notably of the enduringly idealistic Armin, the increasingly desolated Mikasa, the newly awakened Flock, and the scattered, broken Eren. Permanently, irreparably fragmented after learning the truth and seeing what his monstrous yearning will lead to. There are so many things that I'd like to say about the Marley Arc and how much it means to me, but I think a lot of it can be summed up through a ramble I did about it in a recent Twitch stream. Marley has such a special... I think this is maybe higher than most people, even some Attack on Titan, like, diehards, would put Marley, I think, from what I gather. But, like, to me, it's a no-brainer that this is absolutely in my upper echelon of favorite tiers ever, of all time. It is well worth a spot in this tier, a spot in my top 10. I just adore everything about it, and there's something about the anime with this. There is something special about the weekly experience for the Marley anime as it was coming out that just is so unique and so special, with the OST, the new visuals, the new EG, the new OP. Na 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 na. It's there's something super unique about Marley. I love the anime for it. It can be rough here and there, but overall I think it's a fantastic adaptation. One of my favorite parts of the adaptation, despite some limitations. Marley changes your entire view and perception of the scope of Attack on Titan and all that it is. After you get the bombshell that is Return to Shiganshina, it's like, holy shit, where does the series go from here? I recontextualize everything. Then it gives you the full other perspective from the other side of the wall. Reiner, and then introducing this entire new cast. It seems like a no-brainer now that it's happened. But Gabby, Falco, and then the likes of Udo, Sophia, Colt, Peak, Porco, Zeke from another perspective. This is transportive. This is everything to me. I think of so many moments of Marley that just... I'm tearing up now just thinking about it. Oh man, this is a special arc. I think of when you have Falco just thinking after the train ride, is Lieutenant Braun, is he someone I can trust? As he looks to Reiner, and he's just all by himself, just looking beyond, like, the loneliness that it sells. And then I think this always chokes me up, when you see all of these kids returning home to their families. And it sells so beautifully how they're in such a cruel situation. None of them deserve any of this. The cycle of Halos needs to end. But it's so warm and inviting at the same time to be in this, to sell all these characters, to see how idealistic and beautiful of a soul Falco is, and Gabby, despite her rough edges, I immediately loved. Reiner going to each of them, patting them all on the head. Udo, Sophia, Gabby, Falco, his connection with all of them. Oh my god. Them all returning home, and then what always destroys me is Zeke going to his parents, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, but they say, "You've achieved so much." And he says, "Not yet." Oh my god, man. It destroys me. That's life right there. And they're constantly forced away from it. Yeah, it's one of the greatest starts to an arc, without a doubt. The way it shifts the perspective. And I'm just talking about the slice of life stuff. This isn't even talking about the huge peaks of it. The declaration of war. The actual war within it. Where the comeback of our protagonists. Sasha's death. And then Aaron's laugh, reflecting him from Scream. Reiner and Aaron's talk. Guys, there's an ambience to Marley, a vibe, an atmosphere, a feeling that is the best in Attack on Titan. To me, there is something that is unique. Like, there may be other arcs ahead of it for me, but in terms of the feeling I feel when I think of it, this is undefeated. The mood. Yes. And I think of this, the way the ED bleeds into the episodes. Remember when you see Jean reading the paper and just walking off as this comes in? Oh my god. And then there's a moment at the end of the festival where these kids just indulge in the things that kids should indulge in. And Reiner's dragging Gabby, and she's just like, I wish every day could be like this. And this song comes in. No words. It's all about those fleeting moments. It's all about what makes life living. Is these little moments that should be come far more often to these characters. And that's what Zeke realizes too late. And with all that said, in the unrefined way that it was, I don't think that I have much to add to this. There's just a special element of ambience and nostalgia and perspective and empathy to Marley, and juxtaposed with the grandness and regality of the lore that we obtain about Halos, the presence of Willie Tybur, the thrilling yet heartbreaking conflict when our protagonists land after beautifully introducing us to a new cast and deepening the stories of Zeke and especially Reiner so strongly. This is a masterpiece, and it shifts and explores and broadens things in a manner that is so special and fits with my atmospheric and emotional sensibilities like a glove. While this can be divided into two arcs, to me War for Paradis encapsulates everything all the way until the end of the series, and considering that, it is without doubt the most discussed, controversial, and divisive arc in Attack on Titan. Naturally, there is an exhausting amount of ground covered here. A grand expanse of political ideas, the Jaegerist mentality, and the misrepresentative legacy of Erwin, the Survey Corps and their place in this pocket of history, Eren's separation and self-imposed isolation, Zeke's exploration and backstory and ultimate plan. And then the powder keg explodes, leading to one of the most tragic sequences in the story as the catalyst for Eren and Zeke's plan for Eren to enter Path's dimension. We have Gabby realizing partly through Falco and her experiences that Sasha was far more than she thought, and the world is far more than she thought. The revelation that Eren manipulated Grisha into inciting this story. We have the lamentable life of Emir Fritz, the origin of the curse, the start of the cataclysmic rumbling, the formation of the Alliance, the strength shown by Jean despite all temptation to take the easier route, Eren becoming a devil of destruction while experiencing a sense of vast freedom, the cruel contrast between his flight and the widespread destruction, Hanji's sacrifice, Moggoth and Shadis' deaths, and the lead into the masterful 1-2-3 punch of the material from chapters 137, 138, and 139. Coalescing with Armin convincing Zeke of his entire life's work being misled due to not being capable of understanding the beauty of the little moments in life, the Alliance finally stopping Eren, and so much more. That was a mouthful. Now, like I've said, initially upon finishing the manga, I was extremely conflicted despite liking the ending and still holding the series in extremely high regard. It's a lot to take in and digest, and I think there are definitely parts that felt underbaked or strange initially, and some that still feel odd to this day. But the volume release extras and the later anime adaptation did wonders through presentation brilliance and little alterations for helping me to properly, fully connect with and embrace the ending. And at this point, I'd consider it to be one of my favorite endings to a story. Flawed in places, but challenging, abstract, and exceedingly emotional, high concept yet eternally relevant and important, and demonstrating excellent utilization of its cast, from the big players to the more minor ones who are concluded with exceptional qualities such as Colt, Porco, or Mr. Browse. In terms of the arc after the rumbling starts, while not perfect, this adaptation helped me to see a stunning beauty in moments that I hadn't been able to without its direction. The nostalgic genius of using barricades in Thaw is an example of that early on, and in terms of the finale, I was so moved by the general presentation, but in particular, Marina Inoue and her stirring, gutting performance as Armin, that I was suddenly struck with the realization that he was my second favorite character in the story. The sheer emotion brute forced me into that realization. It is simply one of the best performances I've ever heard. And all of the rest of the cast are followed through with tremendous aplomb for me, from Levi to Mikasa to Gabby and Falco, from the legacy of the Survey Corps to the brutally crushing truth of the Jaegerist movement. But more than anything, my most prominent takeaway from all of this was that Eren Yeager is one of the best and most complex characters I've ever seen. At once a brilliantly, masterfully conceived paradox of a human being and a reflection of the story he takes part in. He alienates and divides opinion. He is difficult and challenging to conceptualize at times, just like his story, but he is everything I look for in a character and more. To this day, I have people in my DMs demanding that I explain to them how he isn't an asshole in character form, and I don't think that'll ever change because that's in his design. His complexities and contradictions are natural and inherent, and that will alienate people, but I wouldn't change a thing about him. Now, I'm not here to analyze Eren in extraneous detail because that's far beyond the scope of this video, and I've talked about his nuances and complexities in other videos, in tweets, and in streams. But I'd just like to say that War for Paradis solidified Eren as beyond special and into a short list of characters that are in the conversation for the singular best I've ever seen. He is that stirring, emotional, and multifaceted, and his simultaneous bewilderment and clarity in 139 at the nature of his self is just as masterful as his act of forcing Grisha to commit unimaginable horrors in 121, or his freedom moment in 131, or any moments of genuinely transcendent quality that I could point to strung together by richness, thematic potency, and human rawness and flaws all the while. Of course, as I alluded to, I do still think there are problems with this ending. I really don't enjoy the fake-out deaths for Gabby, Connie, and Jean. I think Gabby absolutely had to survive for the story to properly function in its ending, and I'm not against Connie and Jean surviving in a vacuum at all. Jean is one of the best characters, and him surviving and contrasting Floch is pretty fitting, but it does feel cheap and overly manipulative to me to have them turn into titans and immediately turn back, especially after their beautiful Survey Corps farewell. I've seen rationale for why it works, and I definitely understand the perspective, but respectfully disagree. I just don't think this was good at all. In addition, my biggest problem with the final chapter was the way that the characters seemed to clamor over heaping praise on Eren after awakening to what he'd done and intended through having their experiences with him revealed. I think the story does a fantastic job with approaching Eren, this broken boy possessed by a frenzied, monstrous yearning for destruction as well as a desire for freedom and peace for his loved ones, inherently monstrous yet also a result of his environment in some ways, fragmented across time, sympathetic yet unforgivable. With the finely tuned balance of decrying his deeds and standing against what is a truly evil act while understanding and sympathizing with why he was driven to do that in the first place. But this scene is an unfortunate exception. I think it leans far too heavily on it feeling like most of the cast forgive Eren and love him and think he's a hero and a great guy, when he's decidedly not, and the story went through great lengths to tell us that. And it's tough because I know that isn't the intent, but despite being fixed a tad in the anime, it still leans too far in that direction to not feel that way in isolation. Likewise, the Reiner letter sniff was bad. Tonally bizarre, creepy, and weird, and not in keeping with the tone of the ending. I love the idea of Reiner finally being able to be carefree enough to be genuinely silly, but the execution left me wanting. It's less obtrusive in the anime, luckily. And lastly, this isn't a problem with the actual ending per se, but a rare criticism of the approach post-time skip that I have is that I simply don't think Historia was executed well. I jived with her decision to become queen on her own terms at the end of Uprising, but once she sat on the throne, I don't think Isayama knew quite what to do with her, and to me she always felt kind of shafted after that, drifting in and out of the background of the story but never feeling as relevant as she should have to me. However, despite these problems, my main takeaway is that War for Paradis as a whole is one of the best arcs I've ever experienced. In fact, I recently did a favorite anime-manga arcs ranking and it ended up 3rd. Although do remember that this is for the beginning of War for Paradis until the end of the series. The ending, despite these flaws, has actually grown on me so much that it's become one of my favorite ever. There's a richness in payoff and emotion here that is sublime. And it took the adaptation finishing up and some directorial and writing decisions on its part for me to properly connect with it in this way, but I'm so incredibly glad that I did. There is an angst and hurt in your heart that rears its head at the end here. A visceral aching sadness that things could not have been different for Eren, and the feeling that he didn't need to be put in a position that would accentuate his monstrosity and inner desire to oppress to avoid his oppression. But regardless, it ends in tragedy. You think back to Zeke's childhood and realization that he missed the forest for the trees in life, the image of Eren, Mikasa, and Armin running to that tree. Eren and Mikasa in the cabin, and I'm just filled with such profound sadness. I could spend any given day feeling miserable just thinking about the ending, but likewise, there is just enough evidence for hope in the series. The tiniest glimmer, to not give up on it and to keep pursuing it rather than resorting to evil for a false peace. As long as there is the tiniest possibility for connection and understanding, the original motive of the Scouts, that is worth striving for. And with the children out of the forest, the next generations are key. Eren's deeds were wrong, but his sentiment echoed through and did grant a significant change. The Titan curse was gone and helped to provide a period of peace to Paradis to allow them to prepare for taking the next steps. Yes, there is war, but like Erwin said, as long as humans exist, there will always be. Yet in spite of that, it is in the human spirit to continue to search and thread the needle to find this beautiful world of understanding regardless. The very existence of the Alliance was enough proof of this possibility, as was the fact that Uri and Kenny found one another. And that is what Armin and Mikasa and everyone strive for in the ending, however remote, urged on by the spirits of those who carried that torch. It is very likely that war will always exist, but it isn't a certainty, and will never be a certainty, so there is always a chance for peace through understanding, and as long as that chance exists, it is far more worth pursuing than giving up on hope and giving in to evil. Flock would call that naive, and you can understand why he would. And Aaron's inner yearning to desire to see this flattened Earth roared for that alternative as well. But Attack on Titan states that it is decidedly not an answer nor a solution. It is hell on Earth that is not justifiable in any circumstance. And I agree. And while conflict will continue, the ever-present, unchanging beauty symbolized by the tree that Eren left behind states that there is always a purity of possibility for humanity. Maybe that child at the end will stumble into the tree and reawaken the Titan curse. Or maybe they could find something else entirely, something hopeful to lend credence to this idealized utopia that we strive for. Obviously, it's highly unlikely that it could ever be achieved, but there is value and fulfillment in the act of reaching out for it, and positive societal byproducts that bear fruit. This is why Attack on Titan is one of the most hopeful stories I know, ironically. It sinks us to the very depths of despair again and again in multiple ways. It holds nothing back about mankind's potential for evil and violence. It gives us an embarrassing amount of reasoning to give up. And yet, at the end of it all, it still refuses to give up. It decries Eren as unequivocally wrong while validating his agony and helping us to remember the scared, caring, compassionate boy he was, torn apart by grief and depression. And it asks us to dare to hope for more than he could see, to see value in what he fought for while looking for the answer that he couldn't find. Throwing a ball around, running around and playing by a tree, the fun, silly, mundane times with your loved ones. That is what life is, and the beauty of it is worth persevering through the darkest cruelties of the world for. For this world is both cruel and beautiful. Thank you, Isayama, for one of the greatest stories I've ever experienced, for enriching my life and mind in ways that I could never have imagined, for providing me with some of my favorite characters and emotional sequences, and simply for changing me as a person in such positive ways. And many thanks, of course, to you for watching.